Hi, this time I'm going to talk about dual wielding in role-playing games. I'm also going to talk about some things that apply to real combat situations, but for the most part I'm going to keep it within the framework of RPGs if possible. In different systems, dual wielding has been handled in somewhat different ways based on bonuses to your attack, to your damage, the rate of attacks or attacks per round. Because for example, on the old school side of things, it's usually you get a bonus to your attack when you're attacking with one weapon in each hand, but you also have a penalty to your armor class. For example, maybe you get a +1 bonus to attack and a -2 to your armor class. Another way that I've seen it handled is that you roll a damage die for each of your weapons. So maybe you just make a single attack with and you're wielding a sword and a dagger. You roll a d8 and a d4 and you take the highest number rolled. Another way to handle this is that maybe you're attacking twice per round or twice every other round. So for example, maybe you're armed with your two weapons, and this round you attack twice, the other round you attack once, and the other round you attack twice again. But you have a penalty to each attack. That is, your first attack, you attack with a -2, your secondary attack a -4, and such. There are also other ways in modern systems. For example, in the 2d20 system, and if you're not familiar with the 2d20 system, like Mutant Chronicles or the new Conan RPG, I'm going to put a link in the description below so that you can check out my video where I talk about what I like of the 2d20 system. And in that system, dual wielding is handled through momentum. So for example, maybe you are fighting with a weapon in each hand, and you make your attack roll, and you succeed significantly. Maybe you only needed one success, and you scored 2 momentum above that, that is 2 more successes. So now you can purchase an additional attack thanks to your secondary weapon. If you're using just one weapon, maybe you're using a single sword or a two-hander, you could still make a secondary attack, but it's a bit more expensive. You have to pay 2 momentum. But if you are wielding a weapon in each hand, you only need to pay 1 momentum to make another attack, although that attack is carried out at a higher difficulty. And in a system that is somewhat in between old school and new school, for example, well, that's debatable, but I would say Hackmaster, because Hackmaster is a very intricate and precise system of combat, quite simulationist. Things are handled on a second by second basis. So if you're using a weapon in your hand and other weapon, usually a lighter weapon in your other hand, you attack a bit more often. There is a reduced number of seconds between each series of attacks. So for example, maybe you're attacking with your long sword and you have to wait like 3 seconds. It depends on your specialization, penalties and bonuses, and you get to attack with your short sword or dagger. And you also have a bit of a penalty in defense, because usually in Hackmaster, when you make your defense roll, you have to roll a d20. If you are using a shield, it's just like that, a d20, but if you only have one weapon, it's a d20 -4. But when you are using a weapon in each hand, it's just a d10. So defense is reduced drastically, but you do get a chance to counterattack. If I'm not mistaken, with the perfect defense, I think, you get to counterattack with your secondary weapon and deal considerable damage. Although I think you do get a bit of a penalty in damage when attacking normally with 2 weapons in Hackmaster, maybe to reflect that maybe one of your arms is not as precise and as strong as the other. So all of those systems, as you can see, they always offer an advantage and a disadvantage when using a weapon in each hand. I guess it's to reflect how, unless you are very skilled, you are somewhat like ambidextrous, it's going to be considerably difficult for you to wield both weapons effectively. Although I'm not satisfied with any of those systems, of those ways to handle the two dual wielding attacks. although I do have a preference for the way Hackmaster handles it, because although it's obvious that, for example, if you're using a shield and protecting yourself from arrows and crossbow bolts and such, it's more effective. Right now I'm going to mention some advantages of using a weapon in each hand. To better understand the merits of dual wielding, I'm going to talk about some basics about unarmed combat, because I think only a martial artist who is skilled at fighting without weapons can understand the merits of dual wielding. I have seen some pretty bad videos every now and then of people like not really understanding what dual wielding is all about. They're going to say something like, oh, if you attack with a single weapon, you attack the same number of times as when you are attacking with two weapons, and things like that. Other people mention that dual wielding is just there to look like flashy, for example in movies and video games and such, and that in real life it doesn't work like that. Well, yes, in real life you're not going to engage in overly, what would you say, fancy or flashy movements. You're going to attack straight to the point, very bluntly. There are some moments that you could carry out some flourishes, but they are very specific. Most of the time it looks somewhat unelegant when you're fighting with two weapons, and so there are differences between what you see in fiction and real life. So right now let's take a look at some of the basics of unarmed combat to understand why dual wielding can be so effective. One of my martial arts instructors always used to say, the leg is quite powerful, that is, he was talking about the kicks, but the arms have more pathways, or the hands, I don't remember if he said hands or arms, but the arms have more pathways. So this basically means that although a kick is quite powerful when you are quite skilled and precise in their use, because throwing a kick in a real life situation is, you really have to be quite skilled, have good training to use them effectively. But when it comes to the hands, there are so many different zones and angles that you can take advantage of. And just to show that I'm not disrespectful towards kicks, right now I'm going to do a series of, I guess you could say a basic routine of kicking, just to show you some of the flexibility of kicks, of the variability. Now, when I'm going to do this series of attacks, take in mind that it's sort of like a shadow boxing. When you manage to connect your attack, any sort of attack with your opponent, you really can tell how he's going to react. Maybe sometimes he's going to back away from the attack, or maybe he's going to get really angry and charge at you even if you're already attacking him. He could move to the side, duck and weave, parry, sidestep, etc. Oh, I also recommend that if you are not familiar with the difference between parrying and blocking, I'm going to put a link in the description below so that you can watch a video that I did about blocking and parrying. So let's start with a routine of kicks. As you can see, those were just 3 kicks, attacking a lower area of the opponent. Maybe the opponent went a bit like this, like ugh, and you managed to strike the head, and then you finished it off with a jumping kick. Now, those types of flashy kicks of the jumps and such, you should never, in my opinion, as my recommendation, you shouldn't use them unless the opponent is already somewhat stunned, because it's somewhat easy to see them coming. And when you show your back to the opponent, when you are trying to do those fancy kicks where you expose your back to your opponent, it's quite easy for the opponent to attack you while you're at it, and it can be quite devastating. So you have to be careful with those. Now let's take a look at just hand strikes with open palm and fist. It is said that Bruce Lee could punch 5 or 6 times in 1.5 seconds. So as you can see, those are it's quite easy to overwhelm the opponent when you reach that level of mastery. So right now I'm just going to do some hand techniques to show you all of the different angles that an attack can come from. Again, this is sort of like shadow boxing. So here we go. So as you can see, there are many different entry points. You can attack your opponent in so many different ways, and of course you have to keep in mind that he's going to be pushed around by your attacks, but you can appreciate that there is a certain augmented rate of fire, to put it in a way, more attacks than if you were just using, like, for example, if I were just going to use a single hand, it would be somewhat uncomfortable. It could be possible, but it's a lot better to use both hands. And now let's combine it with kicks and attacking with our fists and such. As you can see, it's a routine of attacking high and low and midsection, and trying to keep the flashiness to a minimum. So if we take these concepts and apply it to dual wielding, you can see the advantages. Now, excuse me for a minute, for a second. Let's say, let's talk about that, what I would consider an error that they say. Attacking with a single weapon, it's just as fast as when attacking with two. Right now, I'm going to try to attack as fast as possible with a single weapon, and let's see how it goes. Right now I'm attacking as fast as possible, and I can already feel that if this was actually a really heavy weapon, it would really damage my wrist, attacking like that. And now let's use two weapons. I want you to measure, to appreciate how you get to score more attacks when using two weapons. So here it goes. And that's logical, because when one weapon enters or goes in, the moment I am retracting it, I am already attacking with the other weapon. And of course I'm going to be attacking different places, so the opponent cannot tell where the attacks are coming from. They could come up or come down. Sometimes you could attack simultaneously, doing like a double strike. And if the opponent is just using a single weapon, it's going to be quite difficult. If you're getting attacked from, let's say, they're trying to cut your head, and they're attacking torso as well, and you have just one weapon, you'll have to be really skilled at sidestepping and parrying to manage to escape from that. So that's the thing with dual wielding. It offers the possibility of overwhelming your opponent because of the different zones and angles from which you can attack or you can strike. And just imagine, let's combine it with kicks. You see? Now, that's a really good point. Well, this is a bit sidetracked, but this is some advice that I'm going to give you when trying to block some kicks, because I have seen videos where they recommend that you block a kick with this. That is, if someone is attacking you with a kick, trying to hit your ribs, they say that you should do this and catch the kick with your ribs and capture it like that. I wouldn't recommend it, because you would need very strong lats. You would need perfect control of sidestepping. You would need both of those conditions, and also that your opponent is considerably weaker than you, because otherwise you're going to get the full blow of the kick. If somebody is attacking you, your ribs or whatever other part, I recommend rather that you sidestep and you block it with your elbow while capturing the kick like this. So, for example, the kick is coming from here. I block it here, capture it, and I can do whatever I want with the opponent, any sort of sweep or counter strike. Very important. I think those videos sometimes do a bit of damage when informing people how to protect yourself. And now, when it comes to dual wielding, there is also the advantage that each weapon is going to be more threatening than, for example, when using a shield and a sword. Because, for example, maybe I'm using a shield. I have an opponent over here, and I have an opponent over here. If I have my shield in this arm and my sword in the other, I can threaten this opponent. But this other opponent, at the most, I'm going to be able to do some shield bashing, of course. But if that opponent on the side of the shield knows how to kick, he may end up breaking my shield, or at the very least, it depends on the material of the shield, but he could also damage my arm. So it's nothing. It could be disadvantages. There's also the case that some opponents are quite agile. I remember reading in a book, I think it was one of the battles of Kuhulin, and in that book, excuse me, we see probably a good example of how some Celtic warriors fought. What Kuhulin basically did was he was quite skilled at jumping and using the rim of the opponent's shield as a bit of like support, and striking from above. So, for example, he would basically do this, and as you can see, if I just had a bit more support, I could perhaps go even higher and striking from above. And even if your opponent was going to like attack you with an overhead strike like that, you could swat, you could fall down and try to cut the wrist of your opponent from the other side as well. So there's that disadvantage. But also, what if the opponent just he notices that you are having problems with his body over here, with his pal, and he decides to grab your shield and starts pulling at your arm with all of the weight of his body. Unless you're incredibly strong, you won't be able to overcome his weight with just one arm. And the moment you're trying to struggle from pulling at your shield, this guy over here is going to finish you off. You're going to be fighting a losing battle. But if you are using two weapons, you are threatening both of the opponents, both of the enemies. Because unless you have like a shield spike or something, I prefer to take a shield bash than getting cut with a sword. So now you can threaten both of your opponents through cutting or stabbing. And if they, for example, decide to charge at the same time, you have two weapons, that is two opportunities to parry, to cut, move to the side, attack, thrust. And there are just so many ways in which that shield and sword could be overcome when attacked from two sides. Maybe the opponent just tackles at you and you have to protect yourself from the tackle with your shield, and at the same time the other opponent is going to be attacking you. So there are certain disadvantages. That's why in warfare they use different shield walls and shield formations to protect themselves from being overwhelmed like that. There are some really fast opponents constantly moving around, and if you are fighting one-on-one against an opponent, even if you are using a shield, as I was telling you, there are ways to overcome that. It's very important to be fast and have great stamina, and unless I would recommend in that case maybe a lighter shield, but I would still consider dual wielding quite better. But that's just my personal preference. You really have to practice quite a bit, and as I was telling you, if you are skilled in striking with your hands unarmed, that's also a good advantage. What else? I was going to talk about something else. Oh yes, some people also raise the argument that, for example, in an RPG, when you're moving through a dungeon or something, that it's not a good idea to use a weapon in each hand because you need to open doors. Well, I think that's also debatable because, for example, usually the thief of the party or the scout or the ranger or whatever is usually moving ahead and opening doors, perhaps after checking for traps in case you're a thief. But let's say there's a door in front of me and I don't know if there is an enemy over there. If it's a light weapon, well, I could hold it in one hand. I open the door and I can go back and strike or protect myself immediately. Or if it's somewhat of a heavy weapon, maybe you could use your hip against, hold it against your body. You open the door and you back away immediately as you cut. So there are different ways to handle that. So overall, I think the different systems when handling dual wielding, they're not satisfactory, but there are some that I prefer more than others. My favorite one is probably the Hackmaster way of handling things, but that's on a second by second type of combat round. Maybe when it comes to old school, well, I think each system has each way of handling this combat style has its merits. You could argue that, oh yes, well, it gives you a bonus when attacking because you're attacking from different angles, different sides. But at the same time, when it comes to the damage, it could be argued that because you're attacking from different sides, you could potentially deal more damage as your cut or thrust manages to catch the opponent on the neck or an important artery. So there are arguments in favor of that. So overall, I hope you have gained some information and entertainment out of this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.